everybody, and welcome to another new episode of Zay Historicizes. So this is the second time that I have filmed this episode. I didn't really care for it, mainly because of a lighting situation, as well as the top that I was wearing for that episode, and it inspired me to go out and get a new ring light. And this ring light is really giving everything that it needs to give. Like, I thought I was gonna have to do some more adjusting, but I'm obsessed with this ring light. Plus it's like much larger. Anyway, enough about the ring light. It has inspired me to go ahead and sit in front of you guys to do another episode of Zay Historicizes, because it's been kind of a long time coming. This is going to be another installment into Unhinged Newspaper Stories of the past, but I'm gonna be kind of doing a twist into this series today, because instead of looking at a newspaper, I'm actually going to be looking at a magazine. And this magazine specifically will be Ebony Magazine. So just some background, Ebony Magazine was founded in 1952 by John H. Johnson, who was born in Arkansas, but was actually he was raised primarily in Chicago. He did move up to Chicago in the 1930s as a child as part of the larger Great Migration of millions of African Americans to cities like Chicago up north. And with Ebony Magazine, which again was founded in 1952, he was really trying to find a way to publish a magazine that looked at African American issues, personalities, and interest in a positive and self-affirming manner. So again, this is during the 1950s, where a lot of mainstream depictions of Black Americans may have been very derogatory. You know, a lot of them would have been very derogatory. So he is again trying to push a lot, really just push to the forefront self-affirming ideas and images of Black Americans in the United States. I am obsessed with the Johnson publications because I'm somebody who is obsessed with vintage glamour. Like, vintage glamour is one of the things that inspires me every single day. I have so many covers saved of vintage Jet magazines, Ebony magazines, Hue magazines, magazines like, Negro Romance, just so many different like vintage magazines. Essence is another one that comes later that I really, really love from that era, because they spotlight beauty. And I'm somebody who's also very, very obsessed with like vintage beauty pageants and pageant queens and things like that, which is something I'm definitely going to get into on this channel. And as I stated, with of course John H. Johnson and the Johnson publications really pushing for a really positive, self-affirming image of Black Americans, they most definitely really hone in on the idea of beauty. So again, that is some background on Ebony Magazine and the Johnson publications overall. He did pass away actually fairly recently in 2005, so that was in my lifetime. He's a very legendary man, and it's amazing what he did in his era with what he had. Speaking of beauty, however, the magazine that we're going to be looking at today again is going to actually be tied around that topic. And the reason I wanted to bring magazines here was because of the letters section. So a long time ago, in the olden days, before social media, before Twitter, before Instagram, people still had opinions. People would see things on television, people would see things in magazines, and they had opinions. Nowadays, we all hop on our smartphones and we tweet things and we Instagram things because everybody needs to know exactly how we feel about literally anything at any time. However, back in the olden days when the internet was unavailable, magazines had letter sections. And letter sections are such a fascination of mine because people would write in from all over the country, at times even out of the country, to magazine editors. And the editors would publish all of these letters that they received in the letter section of these magazines. It would be about a specific story. Somebody would give their opinion on the story, their opinion on an artist or celebrity, whatever that was. And it would also post like their name and the city that they lived in. So it wasn't quite as anonymous as social media is today, but again, it was a way for people to get their opinions out there. And these letter sections are so interesting. I love them because a big part of my interest in history is individualizing the narrative. Whenever I do Unhinged Newspaper Stories of the past, I'm looking at historical eras, but I'm really looking down at like those individual narratives. What so-and-so was doing on that day. So-and-so had her birthday party on that day. These people were roller skating and they knocked over this old man. You know, a lot of these things that I've shared on this channel before. The letter section is another way to really do that. And I really look at the letter section as like pre-social media, social media. Like that's kind of how I do it, because these opinions are very, very far. They're very, very wide. And they're also very interesting because they are in real time. So you really get to see how people felt about certain things and certain issues right at the time that they were happening. So the Ebony Magazine issue that I'm actually going to be looking at today was the August 1966 issue, which is titled The Black Woman. However, the letters that are published in that magazine are actually, they're actually in response to a June 1966 article, the magazine that was actually titled The Natural Look. So the natural look is, as we know it today, of course, the afro, and just embracing natural styles, specifically as it starts with hair. The afro is a very, very big pinnacle part of that. And 1966 is a very, very interesting year. In that year, the oldest boomer was 20 years old. So baby boomers were really, really, really coming up. They were really coming of age at that time. 1966 was during the Vietnam War. It is also the year that you had the founding of the Black Panthers People's Party. And I would say the 1960s is so interesting because it was this decade where the ideas surrounding blackness changed so rapidly. Being black in 1960 versus 1969 was like night and day. And it even starts not just with hair, but even verbiage. I mean, in 1960, it was Negro. By 1969, it's Black. And in the magazine, in the letters I read today, you can kind of see how that verbiage is changing and evolving in real time in 1966. So it is, I mean, I just thought it was a very, very interesting read. And I'm going to be reading quite a few of these letters. And I know that I've been rambling on and on now for quite some time, but it does, I mean, this is just a topic that endlessly fascinates me. And I 100% wanted to hop in front of the camera today and again just share a lot of these letters in response to the Natural Look June 1966 issue that ran on Ebony Magazine. All right, so let's go ahead and get into some of these letter responses to the Natural Look. And like I said, I'm going to be reading a good amount of them. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, I'm going to be reading the opinion, but also the name and where this person lived because they posted that in the magazine. So let's go ahead and get started with the very first opinion. When I got my June 1966 Ebony and saw the picture on the cover, I thought it was a man. When I found out it was a woman and looked inside and saw all those kinky heads, I just tore the cover off of my book. I could not look at it. And that is Miss G. Trouts from Brooklyn, New York. Already very, very strong opinion out of the gate. Let's move on. Ruby and my two daughters told me I ought to write to you and tell you how much we enjoy your wonderful magazine, especially the Natural Look article by Phil Garland in the June 1966 issue. Marvelous. Keep it up. Aussie Davis from New Rochelle, New York. I love how those are both women from New York and they have like complete... They have two opposing, very, very opposing opinions of this, but Aussie does mention that, you know, like the two daughters that she has. So again, I'm assuming like these are much younger girls coming up in the 60s here. Their opinions about things like this are maybe very, very different than maybe Miss G. Trout, who I'm assuming may be part of the silent generation or the greatest generation, you know. So again, this is 1966. The Natural Look absolutely blows up by the time you get to the end of the 1960s and into the 1970s. Obviously, we all know that. But again, you know, pretty controversial at this time. So let's move on. I was going to send my picture as an eligible bachelor for 1966, but with all of these au naturels around, I think I can wait. Philip Boateng from Kingston, Canada. Oh, here's a Canadian man. Okay, how many black folks they had there in 1966? Anyway, I do want to look up like the eligible bachelor section. I need to do an eligible bachelor section of Ebony. I would love to see what the like eligible bachelors looked like in 1958. Like what their professions were and things like this. Anyway, he's saying he's not gonna do it because he's not here for the Natural Look. Okay, Philip. It's about time we Negro American women appreciated our natural attributes. The white man has been trying to mold us into his image for centuries, and it's about time we said, no thanks, chum. I'd like you to take a good look at what I already have. Sylvia Bird, Chicago, Illinois. So she is a Chicago native. I do think a lot of Black Americans in the inner city in places like Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, a lot of them do embrace the Natural Look they do embrace it like a lot more readily than people who, like, let's say Black Americans who have been a little more suburban and more like upper middle class. And I'm going to get into some of that a little later. So let's go to the next one. I'm perfectly content to let the naturalists follow their own trend and try diligently not to criticize. However, I am neither a black Anglo-Saxon nor an inhibited frantic sheep conforming to so-called Caucasian standards of beauty. I am happily a liberal-minded girl of 16, proud to be a Negro and proud to follow the dictates of my own sense of good grooming. Paula E. Robinson from Washington, D.C. So this is 16-year-old Paula. She would have been born around 1950. I would not be surprised if she was in a full-blown afro by 1968, 1969, probably when she was getting into college. She's a girl from DC, girl, like Howard is right there, okay? It's just one of those things that I do think is a pretty interesting, it is kind of like an interesting read to read it from a 16-year-old girl. She also does mention like the black Anglo-Saxon, but then at the same time refers to herself as Negro. So again, I do want you to pay attention to some of that verbiage. So let's go ahead and go to the next opinion. I never really knew how very brainwashed Americans of color were until I started discussing the article, The Natural Look, with my associates. Most of the people did not care for the natural look. A few people were quite indignant, and one lady said, I think it's disgraceful. Others commented that next we would be wearing cloths tied around us and rings through our noses. Such attitudes prove that we really have a battle on our hands. It is true that we are not Africans, but we are not white either. Rather than fashioning ourselves after our originals, we try to look like white people by pressing our hair and bleaching our skins. How long will it take before we open our eyes? I thank Ebony for the article and look forward to other articles which will help us to see the truth and accept ourselves as we are. For then, perhaps, with this new pride in ourselves, we will become unified. And that is Gilda Cocker from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Another very, very opinion that I did want to spotlight here as well. So again, this is all just all on the heels of like the Black is Beautiful movement. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown does drop in 1968, so still that is a couple years away. She does mention something here about like wearing cloths tied around us and rings through our noses. The 1960s was an era where National Geographic magazine was this is something they actually apologized for recently, where they definitely pushed the image of the exoticized African. So a lot of times it was taking images of people in various African tribes and really, really pushing that narrative to the forefront of the minds of Americans. So again, this is somebody that mentions this, but it is going to be mentioned again later, the idea of like this exoticized African, like butt naked, just sort of roaming around, rings around their noses, patterns all over their face, all those sort of things, which there's really nothing wrong with that because there are many tribes all around the world who do adorn themselves in those things. But I did want to kind of like draw in that Nat Geo connection because again, this is 1966 when those images by Nat Geo would have been incredibly popular, definitely the forefront of what Americans thought of Africans in that era. So let's go to the next one. I wonder if our women would accept us in the natural look with no shave or haircuts. And that is Lloyd Peterson Sr. from DeRidder, Louisiana. I don't know what to say about that opinion, honestly. Let us go to the next one. We have Miss Sylvia Muldrew from Los Angeles, and she says, a question, if you please. Where, if anywhere, can one purchase a natural wig? Those of us who, ironic twist, had too many white genes would like to know. And the editor's note says, you got us. They're about to give her a wig. Natural wigs do become pretty popular too, so that's another thing I want to point out there. So the next opinion, the natural look, June 1966, is for soul brothers only. Let's not lead our women back to grass huts. Can you picture the Supreme's natural? Yuck. Robert Earl Ann in San Francisco, California. So again, this is another one with like the grass huts, like the exoticized African image that would have been really popular at that time. I did want to mention that he actually specifically mentions the Supremes by name here. In 1966, the Supremes were the biggest American act in the world. They were the biggest act of the 1960s that were not the Beatles. So the Supremes were the forefront of what the United States of America would have associated with like black glamour in that era, especially considering, of course, you have Diana Ross there, who is like the most glamorous woman that has ever lived in this world. So they definitely were the forefront of being incredibly glamorous women. And for him to mention, like, can you imagine the Supremes with the natural look is very ironic because in 1968, 2 years after this, the Supremes released their Love Child album. And on the Love Child album cover, they are literally all sporting the natural look. And they do famously appear on Ed Sullivan, like performing like barefoot. So it's like a very far cry from like the Baby Love, you know, Where Did Our Love Go, Stop in the Name of Love, You Can't Hurry Love Supremes. They're very, very deglammed. And of course, Love Child is a song that is quite literally singing about a love child, you know, a child born out of wedlock into shame. And they do like, it's like the image is kind of like them in the ghetto. Earlier, I mentioned that the natural look was embraced more by people in the inner city. And Ebony Magazine would have had a reading base that would have been typically like middle class or upper middle class Black Americans in that era, which is where a lot of this like disconnect comes from sometimes. And we can definitely kind of get into like the conversation about how the Supremes only really embraced the natural look when they kind of gave us like a struggle album of like a love child of like being in the ghetto, and then it was like back to the wigs again. But again, it is very interesting here that he does mention the Supremes with the natural look, and they quite literally do that like in 1968, 2 years from that. So let's move on to our next opinion. So I've got news for you. The straightening comb, curlers, permanents, false eyelashes, wigs aren't being manufactured just for Negro women. They were first made for Caucasian women. It has been so ever since Cleopatra. We just borrowed the idea from them, so evidently they are unnatural also. And speaking of the Doris Day and Elizabeth Taylor look, how do you suppose they look when they wash their hair or swim? And that is Miss David E. Houston Sr. from St. Paul, Minnesota. So yeah, this is a kind of like another argument that I'm seeing, but she is essentially mentioning some of the white celebrities that this article mentioned, like Doris Day and Elizabeth Taylor. And she's like, when they wake up, they aren't that beat either, girl. Okay, we all put on the falsies and the wigs and all that sort of stuff, which is true. So point there, but still. Anyway, continued here to Samuel Abbott Jr. from the Bronx, New York. Thank you for having the guts to print an article on the natural look. However, a few points seem to escape the author. Because I accept the fact that I am Black and not white does not mean I'm against white beauty standards. White beauty standards are great if you are a Caucasian. But for Negroes to judge themselves by another race's beauty standard is likely trying to make a poodle look like a collie, and it makes almost as little sense. Also, the fact that some Africans are now straightening their hair and wearing wigs doesn't add any prestige to it. In all due respect for my African sisters and brothers, the American Negro does not have a monopoly on inferiority complexes. Somebody put that on a Billy bit, okay? Like, that is the truth, okay? Now, Sydney A. Trower. The natural look is not only appealing to the eye, it gives us much needed sense of identification. And she's also a Brooklyn girl. Okay, period. So I'm gonna go ahead and read this one here. It's a little more lengthy, but there is an editor's note that I find pretty interesting here. So let's go ahead and get into this one. Your June 1966 issue of Ebony is to be commended for attempting to set the Negro back 100 years. There are some misguided young ladies who are enchanted by your magazine cover of the natural look. The young ladies who are practicing this look are just plain lazy, nappy-haired females. What do you mean by rejecting Caucasian standards? If Caucasians did not patronize a beauty salon, they would have the same conditions as your so-called new mode for women. I would like for the Negro woman to continue to be beautiful with the aid of a beautician, if necessary. All races do. I am empathically against your opinion. And this is R. Edward Dorsey from Philadelphia, PA. And they do put a note here where it says, Ebony's opinion neither advocates nor opposes the natural look, gladly concedes the right of any woman to make her own choice, which is just the truth at the end of the day. Every woman can make her own choice about what she wants to look. But it is also one of those things where it's like, anytime something slightly goes wrong, it's like you're setting us back 100 years. Like, girl, bye. These are things that people still have the conversation with today. So to see it like 59 years ago is not surprising because, like I said, like same old, but it's just funny to see like a woman with the afro on the cover, because these women were not like completely, they had earrings, they were dressed up, you can tell they had makeup on, they just had an afro, girl. Like, calm down, sis, okay? Like, please calm down. It cannot be that deep. I'm gonna go ahead here and I'm going to read the final opinion that I'm going to share today. So after reading the article on the new mode in Negro women's hairstyles, I have only one comment to make. Who needs it? This woolly skull look is nothing more than affectation, and the exponents of it are rationalizing their motivations. If they are so anxious to reflect their African heritage, why don't they wear rings through their noses? Their smug implication that they possess the courage to reject white standards is more of a case for gall than guts. It's presumptuous to subject the public to the sight of their dry, nappy looks, complete with knotted up hairlines. Why should Negro women be obliged to prove their racial pride by wearing their hair natural? White women don't do this because their natural state is stingy and straggly, which is why they too spend hours in the beauty salons. And why should Negro women have a mission to extol their ancestry by sporting a certain haircut? Do Irish women do this? Do the Jewish? Do the Chinese? Having one's hair done is not being guilty of emulating whitey, but rather a case of catering to vanity, as females from all other nationalities in this country do, by choosing popular coiffures which exemplify attractive grooming. Furthermore, what offers a better testimony to the racial and ethnic identity of a Negro woman than the color of her skin? Why should hair be the focal point? And that is Connie Bradley from Maywood, Illinois. So again, that is the last opinion that I'm going to share. Definitely, that was a pretty strong opinion. That whole thing was full of strong opinions. I did not want to read every single one of them because this is just my Unhinged newspaper stories, and I don't want it to go long, but this might be the longest episode yet. I haven't edited yet, so who knows. But again, those are just the opinions and reactions to the June 1966 issue of Ebony Magazine titled The Natural Look. What makes all those opinions so funny too, other than just being funny, is the fact that in February of 1966, Ebony Magazine ran like a controversial cover where it was like, are Negro girls getting prettier? And they specifically showed images of like fair skinned women, none of them who were sporting like the natural look. You know, they all had like the straightened hair and everything. So that was like also fairly controversial, but then the natural look in June of 1966 was like also controversial at the same time. You just can't please people, okay? I think I do kind of want to see the letters reacting to their February 1966 cover. I would like to see how people perceived our Negro girls getting prettier, because I feel like there's a lot of conversation to be had there as well. Anyway, as I stated, those are several of the opinions to the June 1966 issue, The Natural Look for Ebony Magazine. There's a lot to discuss there. There's a lot to unpack there. I do think that obviously everything is just in hindsight. 1966 is really the beginning of the natural look in many ways. And then by 1970, I feel like a lot of the people who are even in these letter sections, certainly the younger ones who would have been baby boomers, were probably in the natural look themselves. It just became the look to have, you know, soul style became the thing, and you know, the celebrities were doing it, everybody was doing it, and it was standard in Ebony by then. But yeah, I just really thought that those were very interesting, and I really wanted to share that because again, it is all about individualizing the narrative. A lot of times when I discuss these old newspaper articles, it's also about creating like conversation. You know, what were people doing at this time in that day? With letters, what you're really seeing is how are people reacting to something in real time at that time. They don't have the hindsight bias of looking back, you know, almost 60 years after 1966 to see how crazy they may sound, but obviously we do. But it is nice to see things in real time. And that one Supremes comment was so hilarious to me again, just because like I feel like a Love Child is stuck in my head now. I'm probably gonna go listen to that song when I'm done filming. But it's just such a conversation starter. I really just wanted to again sit in front of the camera and yeah, just share that installment of Unhinged Magazine stories of the past. Let me know what you think about that though. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna continue the whole letter section thing. I feel like there's a lot that we can unpack there. As always, thanks so much for tuning in to Zay Historicizes, and I will be seeing you next time on this channel. Thanks so much, and you guys enjoy your day.